Hi, today we are going to talk about ISO 42001 evidences, what counts as an evidence and what doesn't count as an evidence, and also what auditors look for. Hey, my name is Lata. I'm the head of AI governance at Global AI Certification Council, where we offer AI governance certifications, including ISO 42001. And also, I'm the head of AI governance at Govern365.ai, which is an AI governance tool, specifically a GRC tool. So let's go and understand that. So today we are going to talk about evidences that are acceptable under ISO 42001. See, ISO 42001 is a management system standard, specifically artificial intelligence management systems, which is AIMS or AIMS. So auditors want proof that AI management system is established, implemented, and maintained. And every piece of ISO 42001 evidence must pass three tests. Number one, the documented information exists. See, the first thing is we need to make sure that our evidence is written down. Then our evidence is version controlled, and also it can be retrieved when asked for. So you can find that reference in ISO 42001 clause 7.5. So this is clause 7.5, especially on clause 7.5.1, you can clearly see that that has to be written down, which means if something is not written down, that's not an evidence. So you can't just say, hey, we do it, but we don't document it. That's not an ISO 42001 evidence. Then it should be clearly reviewed and approved. That's on clause 7.5.2. The next thing is all the evidences should be easy to retrieve, and also they are version controlled, which is the most important requirement, which is in clause 7.5.3. And test number two, to prove that your evidence can be used, the control itself, the Annex A control itself is operating. See, it is important to prove that the activity that we do, that has actually happened. It's not just that someone planned for it or it's just a policy that describes it. It needs to happen. So that's also mentioned in a reference, ISO 42001 clause 8.1 and 9.1. See, clause 8.1 clearly mentions that there needs to be a proof that that activity actually happened. And also clause 9.1 says that it needs to be monitored and measured, which means that has already happened. Test number three, all the evidences should connect to a requirement. So it should either connect to an Annex A control in ISO 42001, or should connect to a clause obligation, or it should be connected to the risk you identified in your risk register. If it doesn't connect to any of these, that is not an ISO 42001 evidence. See, so the summary is every ISO 42001 evidence must follow all these three steps. It should be documented, it should be operating, and it should connect to either a clause or annexure or a risk in the risk register. So what counts as an evidence? So as you all know, the whole AIMS, the Artificial Intelligence Management System itself, is divided into two parts. One is the management system itself, and the next one is the annexures. So these are some of the evidences that needs to be done as part of the management system itself, like policy, scope, roles and responsibilities. So I've also given you what particular clause that is all associated with, because as I said, every evidence need to be associated with a clause or annexure or a risk register. So here, for every evidence, I have clearly mentioned what clause it should be related to. Again, not only the management system, even for annexures, we need to attach evidences. These are some of the evidences for annexure A. So what does not count as an evidence? So main thing is, if you only have a policy, that is not an evidence. You need to actually prove that that policy is executed, it is deployed, dated, signed, and is traceable to an AI inventory or AI system. So if it's not an evidence. So we can't just say that, oh, we do that, but we just don't write it down. That actually fails the clause number 7.5, which is the documented information. So other things that do not count as an evidence are screenshot with no date, system ID, or context. Next thing is, if you buy a AI system from a vendor, you can't just point to their vendor's marketing page and say that, oh, they are compliant, that means we are compliant. We can't say that. Next thing is any evidence created after the audit window has closed, that's also not considered as an evidence. And if you have a training record from 18 months ago for an ongoing control, that's also not taken as an evidence. Any AI generated documents with no human review trail, that also is not an evidence. And if you're planning to reuse ISO 27001 evidence, and if you do not map it to an AIMS clause or the annexure or the risk in the register, then that's also not considered as an evidence. And also you can't just say, oh, we use Azure OpenAI as a substitute for your own controls. That's also not taken as an evidence. So I'm going to quickly share with you the evidence quality hierarchy. So how auditors rank evidence from strongest to weakest. So the first strongest evidence is something system generated records with timestamps, logs, or automated reports. That's why you need tools like govern365.ai, where it automatically generates records, tickets, even it is dated, version controlled, all that can be done. So it is better always to have a GRC or AI governance tool like govern365 to do that. The second best option is to have signed and dated documents with version control. So that means if you're storing anything in Word document or an Excel sheet, that's also considered, but make sure they are numbered, version control, all that is so much more important. The third item is recording all the recurring activity, still doing the training logs, any reviews completed, you're still manually doing it. That all comes under like the medium level of strength in terms of evidence. Number four is manually maintaining all the registers on a document. That's number four. The weakest is having only like narrative descriptions. They're all accepted only as a supplement, but cannot be taken mainly as an evidence. So we need to understand this. So before we file anything as ISO 42001 evidence, we need to ask four questions. Number one, could a stranger understand what this particular evidence proves, against which control or against which clause for which AI system on what date? If they could answer, then that's an evidence. Number two, does it have a name, date, and a version? That's counted as an evidence. Then, if there is a chain from policy to a procedure to recording it to reviewing it and to improve or mitigate it, that's also need to be there. The last one, if the owner changed tomorrow, would the next person find it? So that also need to be considered. So four questions before you file an ISO 42001 evidence. If any of your answer is no for any of these questions, it's not an evidence yet. So these are few things that I want you to remember when you are writing down your ISO 42001 evidences. Number one, evidence has to pass three tests. It exists, it operates, and it connects with any of the clause or annexure. Number two, both clause evidence and annexure A evidence matter. So we need both. Number three, policy without records is not an evidence. Number four, all our evidence should be time-stamped, dated, traceable. That's what actually auditors would look for. Number five, if a stranger cannot follow the trail, it is not ready. So make sure you follow all of that. Then I have given some frequently asked questions. So probably if you have any questions here, you can understand it better. So number one, do we need actually a GRC tool, or can I use only Excel sheet or Google sheet? See, ISO 42001 itself is technology neutral. They did not mention that you need to use a tool or you need to use Excel or Google sheet. They want documented information, right? See, what the auditors would look for is simple. According to clause 7.5, they will look for all the documents that are identified, approved, and version control and available. If you have everything in terms of a Excel sheet or Google sheet cleanly organized, that's still fine. But what the tool like Govern365 will give you is it will automatically give you the version. Even when you upload anything, it will have a timestamp. So you don't have to do a lot of work, which will save your time, money, and also human resources. So again, as I said before, in terms of the strong evidence or the hierarchy of evidence, always a tool, automated tool is always highly preferred. And the second best option is Excel or Google Sheet. With that said, if you do not want to invest in a tool, still an Excel sheet or a Google Sheet or a SharePoint folder is still enough. So next question, what a good document register looks like in a spreadsheet. So again, when you create a document, you need the identification. What's the document ID, name, type, who's the author? And also it should be linked to a clause or a control. Then clear version, what's the date? What if you're changing anything, what's the change history? What are the previous versions? All should be maintained. Then the life cycle. So what's the status of the current evidence? Is it drafted? Is it approved? Or is it retired? Or is it need approval? Or is it already complete and implemented? Need the approver and the approval date, next review date, how long are we retaining all these records, who will get access, who gets read access, all that. See, if you're using a document, you need to have all of these information manually done. But when you have a tool, most of these information, like linking it to a clause, having that life cycle, having the version number, would automatically go well better. Then how long do I need to keep the evidences? ISO 42001 itself do not specify any retention periods. It is the responsibility of the organization to do it. Common practice is to keep the evidence for 3 years minimum. for most of the records. But if there are regulations in your country that asks for it, you need to keep it for longer. For example, EU AI Act actually requires 10 years of technical documentation, especially for high-risk AI systems. So retention rules must be written down for your organization. Next question, can I reuse my ISO 27000 evidence for ISO 42001? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. We can reuse things like control logs, change management records, incident response, supplier security assessments, and all that. But what we cannot reuse is anything related to AI model, AI training data, AI model behavior, impact assessments. We cannot reuse them. If you're planning to reuse anything from ISO 27001, make sure it is connected to an AI clause or an annexure before you submit it as an evidence. Next question is, what's the difference between a document and a record? So both are documented information under clause 7.5, but they serve actually different purposes. A document describes what should happen, like policy, procedure, and methodology. Again, that should also be versioned and updated over time. A record proves what actually happened, like meeting minutes, training completion, incident logs. Again, this should also have all the versions and updated over time. So auditor actually looks for both the document and the record. Question number 5, how much evidence is enough? Again, there is no universal answer. We need most evidences for high-risk systems, especially systems that affects individuals or group of individuals at scale. So it depends on the regulations that is in your country. So for high-risk AI systems, we need more evidences. But if it's low-risk internal tools, then you probably would not need more evidences. Again, it depends on you. It's a common sense thinking in terms of to proving that this is less impactful to people and group of people. You need to understand what is the right amount of evidence and need to submit that. Next question is, can AI generated content be used as an evidence? Yes, as long as you have a human trail. So that are totally fine to use AI policies written using AI. Then any documents or implementation, you can use AI. But the main thing is make sure there is a human oversight at the end and clearly signed and dated by a human. The next question is, what if an Annexure A control does not apply to us? So you can definitely exclude it, but according to clause 6.1.3, which is statement of applicability, you need to clearly give a justification whether it is acceptable for you or not. So you need to give something like, we do not develop AI systems, we only deploy third-party systems, therefore controls relating to model training are not applicable. You need to give clear applicability statement that's acceptable. You can't just go and say, hey, not relevant with no explanation. You need to give clear explanation so that the auditor can approve that. The next thing is, how fresh does the evidence need to be at audit time? It depends on the frequency of the evidence itself. See, if it is like policy reviews, management reviews, or internal audits, probably annual controls are still okay. So any evidences within the last 12 months are considered by auditors. The next thing is like risk reviews or monitoring outputs. Those are probably either monthly or quarterly, depending on your recent execution. Anything under 3 months are considered. And other things like continuous controls, like logging, monitoring, incident responses, that happens to happen very often. Even if you're adding AI systems or AI models, that has to happen often. So that those evidences need to be probably a week old or 2 weeks old. So the evidences depends on what purpose it does it serve. Next question is, who is responsible for collecting evidence? So every control or every management system clause have their own owner. So they are responsible for operating that control or operating that clause. And AIMS owner, which is probably like a chief AI officer or a head of AI governance, they are responsible for making sure that the evidence is collected, organized, and ready for audit. But according to clause 5.1, top management is accountable for the effectiveness of the management system, including the quality of the evidence. So if nobody is named and nobody is responsible, that's not the correct way of submitting the evidence. Then what happens if evidence is missing or during an audit? Again, it depends on how much of an evidence gap do they have. If they have a gap, they can either say it's a minor nonconformity or a major nonconformity. If they mention that it's a minor nonconformity, then you will have 90 days to submit the evidence again. But if it's a major nonconformity, it can either delay your certification or prevent you from getting the ISO 42001 certification. So the worst answer to give an auditor is, oh, we do that, but we just don't have a record. That's not an evidence. So that's why, see, in Govern 365, our AI governance tool, every clause or every annexure, we can actually submit the details, implementation, status of that implementation, like life cycle, like whether it is approved, whether it is drafted, whether it is already implemented. Then you can specify the owner, can specify the reviewer, can specify the approver, and also you can specify the due date. Even when you submit it, if you don't specify the due date, the creation date is already there, which is already like dated and version controlled. You can, when you submit evidence also here, it will automatically show the date of evidence. So having a tool is always more better than having a Google Sheet or a SharePoint folder, because it saves time, money, and human resource. So thank you so much. If you have any more questions in terms of ISO 42001 evidences, please comment below and I will answer everything one by one. Thank you.